Hi guys, welcome back to the So Cultured podcast. We are actually halfway through this season now, which I think is insane. I'm absolutely loving this season so far, I'm not gonna
Same.
lie. It's giving like very dark, very spooky vibes. But I feel like it's almost like the wrong kind of vibe for this time of year because like we're really nearing
It's
Christmas, guys.
Christmas.
I'm so
I love
excited.
Christmas. I mean, we spoke about this on last week's episode, but I'm such a Christmas
I
girly. I'm so
know.
excited. Like, I love the whole Christmas season. I love the actual Christmas day. I know, like, some people don't actually like Christmas Day. Like, my best friend, she just doesn't like it. Do you know what I mean? So some people prefer the season rather than the actual day.
Yeah, I actually agree with that. Like, I love Christmas Day, don't get me wrong, but I feel like the festivities, like meeting up with your
The build
friends,
up.
having a few wines, like going to the different like markets, things like
Mm.
that. I actually feel like that whole like vibe and feeling. Like me and Kieran, we always watch every film of the Harry Potter series on every Sunday leading up to Christmas, so that like
Huh?
the Sunday before Christmas you're watching the last Harry Potter. Like it is like Halloweeny,
Okay.
autumnal, and then leads into like Christmassy vibes, I feel.
Okay, that's cute. That's like what you do that every year.
Yeah, pretty much.
Oh,
It's an
cute. See,
annual
me and Taz
tradition.
were talking off air about Christmas traditions, and you said you don't have any traditions, but I would definitely say that is your
Yeah, I
tradition.
guess. I
I love
guess.
that. See, my traditions are more like on the day. So I have to tell you about my favorite one that me and my family do, which is we actually did this like back in November. So every November we pick a name out of a hat. So we do like a Secret Santa kind of
Mm.
vibe. We pick a name out of a hat. And then whoever's name you pick, you have to go to the charity shop and buy them a full outfit to wear at Christmas dinner. And it is
Oh my god,
hilarious.
no way.
Yeah, it's a really fun way to give to charity over the Christmas period, but it's also just like a really funny thing. And like it's a whole thing. Last year, actually, do you know what? Last year we didn't do it, and I don't know why we didn't do it last year, but the year before, we've done it every other year. The year before, I can't remember who had my brother, but they bought him and Anne Summers Santa dress that they found in the
What?
charity shop. And like we were all just actually just rinsing him all night because we were like, nah, you don't know what's happened in
Oh
that dress, and
no.
now you're sat here wearing it for Christmas dinner. Like it was just hilarious. We were just winding him up. I got put in like a full leopard print outfit from like head to toe, like leopard print hat, leopard print top,
Oh
skirt,
my gosh.
tights, shoes. So it's like you just have to like
What the
go into the
hell?
charity shop, like pick a theme, and then just like
Wait,
roll with
I'm
it.
sorry, wait, we need to rewind. We need to rewind a
Go on,
second. Was that
go
Anne
on.
Summers fit second hand?
Second hand. That's what I was saying. We were all like, you
No.
don't know what's happened in the
Oh,
outfit, babe.
oh.
I mean, I can't say on the podcast what we were actually calling the dress, but I'll beep this out. I'll tell you, Taz, we were calling it dress all night.
Oh my god, I'm not surprised. Who the hell sells that second hand? Like what?
Yeah.
Ew.
It is hilarious though. It was hilarious. So that's
Who
like
is
my favorite.
donating their like sexy underwear, lingerie to fucking Oxfam? That is
I
so
don't
weird.
know. I don't know, but it's funny. Um anyway, so that's my Christmas tradition. So, guys, we need to hear from you. Do you have any Christmas traditions? If you do, drop them in the comments because I love hearing about other people's traditions because I feel like it can like inspire you to start one with your family
Mm.
if you don't already have one, or even just, try something new. Like me and my family, we always kind of do something new every year, like if it's a different game, a different quiz, something like that. So
Yeah.
you guys will definitely have to let us know. Anyway, with that, before we ramble on about Christmas again for ages, let's get into the topic of today's episode. Welcome to the So Cultured podcast,
Where we explore science and tech unfiltered.
we're your hosts, Liv and Taz, two girls who love STEM and spilling the tea.
Each season, we take on a new theme, whether it's busting conspiracy theories, celebrating women in STEM, or breaking down the science in your favourite sci-fi films.
And of course, in every episode, we spill the laboraTEAAAA,
where we share your wildest stories from the world of science.
Let's get into this week's episode of So Cultured. In 1987, a woman in Israel lay on an operating table, about to give her twin sister one of her kidneys. Her name was Eva Moses Kaur, and she was 53 years old. Across the room, her sister Miriam was fighting for her life because her kidneys had completely failed. They were undersized, scarred, and full of infection. Now, for years, doctors couldn't understand why Miriam kept getting kidney infections that no antibiotic could cure. And it seemed to get worse during her pregnancies. So every time she was pregnant, her body reacted as if it was being poisoned. Now, by the time she had her third child, her kidneys began to shut down completely. And when doctors examined them, they discovered something shocking. Her kidneys had never grown larger than those of a 10-year-old child. And no one could explain it until the sisters told their story. Decades earlier, when they were just 10 years old, Eva and Miriam had been taken to Auschwitz. When twins arrived at Auschwitz, they were pulled from the crowd almost immediately, and soldiers shouted, "Twins." And anyone who admitted to being a twin was separated from their family. And parents often thought that it meant safety, that their children might be spared, and in some sense, I guess they were, but definitely not from suffering. Twins weren't sent to the gas chambers, they were sent somewhere else, a section of the camp controlled by a man who would become one of history's darkest figures. And this man was known as the Angel of Death. His real name was Dr. Joseph Mengele, and to the Nazi regime, twins were valuable because they were seen as identical bodies that could be measured, tested, and compared. And to Mengele, they represented something more, which was a way to pursue his obsession with racial purity. If you can't see me, I'm doing quotes. He believed that by studying twins, he could uncover what made people identical, and in doing so, find the secret to engineering what they called the perfect Aryan race. But what he did in those labs was not science. It was literally torture dressed as research. And in the so-called hospital blocks, children were injected with unknown chemicals to see how their bodies would react. And some were even deliberately infected with diseases like typhus or tuberculosis. And others were subjected to operations without anesthetic. But what exactly was Mengele trying to prove, and why twins? That's kind of what we're going to be exploring today. So we'll look at him and what he claimed he was studying versus what he was really doing, and also talk about how modern genetics has tried to rebuild the ethical path that Nazi medicine destroyed. Obviously, before we go any further, just a quick trigger warning because this episode deals with topics including medical abuse, violence, and human experimentation during the Holocaust. And so obviously today's episode is going to be a bit more serious than usual. And just a reminder that we are here to understand both the human cost and also the scientific legacy that followed.
Yeah, that is insane. I think obviously a lot of, I don't know if this is common knowledge that they did a lot of human experimentation, but I definitely knew about it, but I just don't really know to what extent I know. I just know it happened, and they were very discriminative of disabled people and also twins. So yeah, I guess let's start at the beginning. Where did this all start?
Yeah, definitely. So today we're going to be talking mainly about his twin experiment, but to really understand what happened inside Auschwitz and how someone like Joseph Mengele could justify it, we need to go back to the scientific mindset at the time that really made it possible. Because in the early 1900s, a really dangerous idea began spreading throughout the scientific community. And this was the belief that humanity could be improved, quote unquote, by controlling who was allowed to reproduce. And this movement was called eugenics, which is a term that we've all probably heard about. And eugenics really claimed to be about progress, but in reality, it's at its core, it's really built on prejudice and discrimination. Now, the original term was coined by Francis Galton, who is a British statistician, and he's actually also a cousin of Charles Darwin. Now, he believed that just how farmers bred stronger animals or crops, society could breed better humans by encouraging the fit to have more children and discouraging or even preventing the unfit from doing so. Now, eugenics distorted Darwin's theory of evolution and really turned it into basically just a social hierarchy. And I think looking back, it is just so insane how quickly this idea spread, because universities actually taught this whole theory of eugenics. Newspapers would talk about it, and as we know now, governments actually ended up adopting it. But really, beneath all the talk of improvement of like humans was a belief that some lives were worth less than others, which obviously we know is not true. But it's an idea that would go on to justify sterilization programs, discrimination, and then obviously eventually genocides. Now, eugenics wasn't just a German idea, it was actually quite global. So in the United States, more than 60,000 people were actually forcibly sterilized under eugenic laws that remained active for decades. And similar policies existed in Britain, Sweden, Canada, and across Europe. And I was really shocked when I found this out because I actually didn't know about this. But many of these laws or programs, they basically targeted people with disabilities, mental illnesses, and obviously a lot of minority communities. So what was framed as science was really social control. So this is really similar themes to what we saw in last week's episode. Now, before the war, Joseph Mengele studied both medicine and anthropology in Germany. And on paper, his qualifications, I hate to say it, looked quite impressive because he had a PhD from the University of Munich and a medical degree from Frankfurt. Now, his doctoral research is quite interesting because he focused on measuring jawbones and palates to see whether ancestry could be identified through bone structure. Now, whilst people say that his thesis wasn't openly racist and it didn't have any racist claims in there, it definitely reflected a growing interest in Germany at the time, which was using biology to explain race, which is an idea that would later feed directly into Nazi beliefs that he played a really big part in. Now, after finishing his studies, he joined the Nazi Party in 1937 and a year later enlisted in the SS, which is basically a military organization that just served as like Hitler's personal guard, and it's kind of the force that carried out many of the regime's most brutal policies. Now, he began his career working at the Institute for Hereditary Biology and Racial Hygiene in Frankfurt, where scientists were actually encouraged to study genetics and physical traits to prove the differences between races. And during the early years of the war, he actually served as a medical officer on the Eastern Front, where he treated injured soldiers and took part in operations behind German lines. Now, after being wounded in 1943, it was just like a small wound, by the way, like he just got a bit of shrapnel stuck in his shoulder, but that was enough to basically get him reassigned to work in the concentration camp system, which is a move that changed the course of his life and countless others.
It is so strange that Joseph Mengele started out as a normal doctor, studying anatomy and then treating soldiers, and then he somehow ended up doing what he did in Auschwitz. Like, what did he think he was doing there? What did he actually claim to be studying, I guess?
Yeah, it's definitely an interesting, like this was one of my main questions that I wanted to explore when I started the research for this episode. Like, what the hell did he think he was actually doing? Like, what was the whole point? So what Joseph Mengele claimed to be studying was heredity. Basically, this is how traits are passed from parents to their children. And the Nazis believed that everything from intelligence to behavior could be inherited. So by studying heredity, they thought that they were uncovering the biological basis of what made someone like, quote unquote, racially pure. And by the 1940s, genetics was really still quite a young field. And scientists understood that traits could be inherited thanks to Gregor Mendel's pea plant experiments in the 1800s, which if any of our listeners have ever studied genetics, you would have learned about the pea experiments.
Yeah,
but these basically showed how things like flower color or seed shape followed predictable ratios across generations. But while Mendel had figured out that inheritance existed, nobody really knew how it actually worked inside the cell. And we were at a time where the molecule of DNA had been discovered in the 19th century, but its role as the carrier of genetic information still wasn't understood. And the famous double helix structure wouldn't be revealed until 1953, after Rosalind Franklin's X-ray diffraction images really helped piece it together, which we spoke about on last season, Overlooked. We did a whole episode on Rosalind Franklin. So if you want to learn more about her, which she's incredible, you should, then go back to last season. But so at the time of Mengele's so-called research, heredity was still a mystery, and that uncertainty really left space for pseudoscience to creep in. And so the Nazis took Mendel's basic principles and twisted them. So they started claiming that Moral character, intelligence, and racial purity were genetic traits that could be measured, preserved, or even eliminated. And that's really where twins came in, because Mengele saw identical twins as the perfect natural experiment. And this is because identical twins, or like scientifically they're known as monozygotic twins, develop from a single fertilized egg that splits into two shortly after conception. Now, because they're from the same zygote, they share nearly 100% of their DNA. But in contrast, we have fraternal twins, or dizygotic twins, which come from two separate eggs fertilized by two different sperm, meaning they're genetically similar to any other pair of siblings. So they only share about 50% of their DNA. So to Mengele, identical twins offered a way to separate what was nature from what was nurture, which obviously now we know, like, it's really not that simple. But anyway, that's why I got interested in epigenetics, because I'm my twin, and I think this whole topic is really interesting. But yeah, so he thought that if one twin was exposed to a certain condition and the other wasn't, he believed that any differences that you saw would basically reveal the secrets of heredity. And of course, he wasn't actually conducting legitimate genetic research. He was torturing children under the guise of science. And I want to make that very clear at the start of this episode. And we spoke about that in last week's episode, that this is like a common theme amongst many of the stories that we're talking about in this series. And fast forward to now, when real science has advanced, we finally discover the answers that Mengele claimed to be seeking. So the Human Genome Project, which was completed in 2003, mapped all 3 billion base pairs of human DNA and revealed that humans are actually 99.9% genetically identical to one another.
Crazy.
So while small genetic differences exist between populations, they do not align with the social concept of race. So what Mengele imagined as science was actually never science at all. And I just wanted to get that in there, like, quick, just in case someone like tunes out this episode now, which don't do that, but just wanted to get that in there.
Yeah, honestly, like, I think it's just like, obviously it makes so much sense that we're all 99.9% similar to one another, but like, don't you think that is wild to think that like 0.1% is responsible for like how different we all are, how different we look, like
well, not necessarily,
it's all, like, I
because
guess, like,
we have
visual traits a lot of the times, but like, yeah, it's just wild.
I mean, also, obviously, we have epigenetics, and that plays a really big part as well, which we now know. But obviously, at the time, you know, they didn't even know what DNA did, let alone, you know anything about epigenetics.
Yeah, for sure. So obviously, as messed up as all this sounds, and as scientifically flawed that it sounds, maybe we should talk about like the experiments that he actually committed. So what did he actually do with these twins?
Yeah, let's go from the beginning. So when the transport trains arrived at Auschwitz Birkenau, thousands of people were forced out onto the platform, families clutching each other, children half asleep, and people carrying whatever they could. Now, among the SS officers directing them was Dr. Joseph Mengele, and survivors actually later described him as calm, well-dressed, and even polite, which somehow kind of makes what followed more disturbing. And I guess that kind of ties back to why some people thought that when their twins were taken, they were going to be safe, just because he kind of looked and felt a bit different to some of the other like guards or officers. But according to numerous survivor testimonies, Mengele walked the ramp with a clipboard, and he would be scanning people's faces, and he was scanning for one thing: twins. So when he saw a pair of twins, he would be shouting out, "Twins, twins," and guards would pull them out from the lines. And several survivors remembered that moment vividly, like that moment of being separated from their parents and not understanding what was happening, and kind of watching their families disappear, which honestly just breaks my heart. Like every time I think about it, like I literally get a lump in my throat. Like it's just so horrific. But those selected twins were taken to a special section of the camp known as the Zwillingslager. I hope I'm pronouncing that correctly, but Zwillinger is basically the German pronunciation for twins. So in other words, they were known as the twin blocks. And these were barracks 14 and 15 in the children's camp. And historical records and testimonies estimate that about 1,500 pairs of twins passed through these barracks between 1943 and 1945.
What? That is
But
crazy.
right, but fewer than 200 survived. Now, they were actually reportedly given better clothes and slightly more food than other prisoners, but only because they were considered valuable experimental material. And each child was tattooed with a number and a large ZW. Every morning, they were counted and marched to laboratory room for tests. And one survivor, 𝗂𝗂𝗂𝗂, who was 6 years old when she and her twin sister were taken, described the process in interviews decades later by saying, "Our heads, our eyes, our ears, everything was measured. They compared every organ and every limb."
God, it just sounds so horrific. So what was the purpose of that? Why were they doing that?
Yeah, so Mengele's experiments can kind of be put into like two different categories. So we have like comparative anatomy and then like medical testing. So we'll start with comparative anatomy because that's where a lot of the measurements kind of came in. So in legitimate science, just talking about like what legitimacy is actually used for, it's how we understand evolution, development, and the function of just the human body. So today we use comparative anatomy to design prosthetics, study disease, and actually even to model like human organs. But in Auschwitz, it was really twisted into something completely unrecognizable. So Mengele's version was, again, as we've spoke about, it was all about proving racial difference, not understanding biology. So he wanted to show that physical traits like skull size, limb proportions, and eye color could supposedly identify someone's race. So every day, the twins were subjected to an endless series of measurements. Skulls photographed from every angle, their arms and legs were measured with calipers, and x rays of their bones and spines were taken. And actually, large volumes of blood were taken to compare the chemistry between twins and between supposed racial groups. And just a reminder for the listeners, because obviously, I'm talking about racial groups, and I'm assuming that most of the listeners will be aware of this, but just in case you're not, one of the main kind of goals of the Nazi Party was to create the perfect Aryan race. And so one of Mengele's main aims was to figure out what causes like blue eyes, what causes blonde hair. So this is the kind of things that we're talking about. And I guess this kind of takes us into one of the most infamous comparative anatomy experiments that he actually attempted, which is that he tried to change the eye color of children. So he was fascinated by blue eyes, which he associated, like I said, with the so-called Aryan ideal. And he wanted to find a way to make brown eyes blue, or just see if it was possible, or see if this could help him understand about what actually makes eyes blue. So, survivor testimonies and evidence from the Nuremberg doctors' trial confirmed that Mengele ordered an SS doctor, 𝗂𝘂𝗂𝗂𝗯, to actually inject chemical dyes directly into the eyes of children. Now, before fleeing Auschwitz, Mengele destroyed almost all of his notes. So what we now know comes mainly from survivor accounts and from Nazi medical records, which were recovered later by Allied investigators. So the exact chemical composition of the dyes wasn't actually recorded, but historians believe they were based on industrial aniline or phenol dyes, possibly similar to methylene blue, which are actually pigments used in textile production and lab work, but never obviously designed for human use. They were toxic, unsterile, and corrosive to living tissue. Now, from a biological point of view, injecting these substances into the iris, which is the part of the eye that gives your eye its color, really would have been catastrophic, because the iris, if you didn't know, is made up of delicate muscle fibers and pigment cells called melanocytes, and puncturing it would rupture capillaries and nerves, causing immediate bleeding and extreme pain. And the chemicals themselves would then destroy the cells, killing the tissue, and then eventually damaging the muscles that actually control the pupil. And by the way, the procedures were actually done without sterile conditions. So the eyes frequently became infected. And so, yeah, they got a severe internal eye infection that caused blindness within days. And in many cases, the children also actually developed sepsis as bacteria entered the bloodstream through the injection sites. Now, when the children died, their eyes were removed and preserved in formaldehyde before being sent to the Kaiser Wilhelm Institute in Berlin, where Mengele's previous mentor claimed to study iris pigmentation for racial research. After the war, these experiments were presented as evidence at the Nuremberg doctors' trial, helping to expose the brutality and complete lack of medical ethics behind Nazi science.
Jesus. I mean, I don't know if you could see my face throughout that whole thing. I was literally
Mm-hmm.
like, the grimace was real because that is what the hell?
Yeah, literally
And like that
absolutely
just goes to show
insane.
like how primitive the science was because like they were just injecting dyes into their eyes as if it would change color. Like, I'm not
Yeah.
gonna lie, but that just sounds dumb. Like, it doesn't even sound
Yeah.
like they just didn't. I don't know. Like, it just wasn't like
No
at
scientific,
that
there was
time
no
they
scientific
hadn't.
basis.
Yeah, and it but just sound like obviously they weren't technologically advanced scientifically to obviously
Mm-hmm.
know what causes your eye color. But like I feel like it would be common knowledge that if you're injecting a dye into your eye, like it's not gonna be like you if you get anything in your eye, it's gonna be like painful and damaging. So it's like I don't know, like where's the logic?
I
Like
mean,
you said at the beginning, it just seems like an excuse to
yeah, just do
torture
evil things.
people.
100%. And also, actually, if you really want to get into it, like, did they have any scientific basis for doing this? When you really think about it, no, because, I mentioned about how they had the pea experiments from Gregor Mendel. So actually, if they'd learned anything from them, then I think they would realize that
Yeah.
injecting dye is a pointless experiment. So it's like, yeah, uh, there's even a stronger basis for actually having no scientific basis for this experiment if we take that information into account. Do you know what I mean? So the second type of experiment he carried out was medical testing, and that is really where things actually become even worse. Now, in real science, medical testing is obviously meant to help people, and it is normally based on informed consent, careful observation, and really a duty to protect the patient's well-being. But at Auschwitz, these principles obviously didn't exist. Now, according to survivor testimonies and the records presented at the Nuremberg doctor's trial, he would infect one twin with diseases such as typhus, tuberculosis, or gangrene, while keeping the other as an untreated control. Because apparently he wanted to observe the progression of the illness and then compare the results. And
What
when
the
one twin
hell?
died, the other was usually killed so that their organs could be dissected side by side. And there was no anesthetic, no sterilization, and no purpose other than cruelty. He also carried out blood transfusion experiments. So, because identical twins have the same blood type, he wanted to see if they could share blood safely. And in modern medicine, transfusions are done in sterile environments with precise volume control and obviously some really close monitoring, because even a small error can cause shock or cardiac arrest. But Mengele really ignored all of that, and he transfused blood directly from one twin to another, often in large volumes, which caused circulatory collapse, organ failure, and death. Which, again, I just think this comes back to the fact that he was just doing experiments for the sake of doing them. Because really, I mean, their whole, if you're really trying to say, okay, he was there actually trying to do like legitimate science, and his legitimate science was that he had this interest in heredity because they were trying to create the perfect Aryan race. How on earth, please, is transfusing blood assisting in this? So I think this just really goes to show the obvious, I mean, I don't even need to say it, but the obvious lack of ethics, and the fact that they were just doing science like, well, sorry, I'm not actually going to call it science. They were just doing things like willy-nilly just because they could, in the name of science. Do you know what I mean?
Yeah, it's literally insane. And it kind of feels like, obviously, you mentioned like 1,200 pairs of twins like came through. So I feel like he was just, yeah, like you say, just doing willy-nilly experiments because he was like inundated with people he could test on. Like, that's what it
Yeah,
sounds like to me anyway.
a hundred
It's
percent,
like,
a hundred
it's
percent.
almost like he's just like, um, serving like his own like
Yes.
fascination and like I don't
Yep.
know.
100%. Yep. You just put it into that's exactly it. That's exactly how I feel. Um, but getting even crazier now, one of the most disturbing cases or experiments that he did actually comes from the testimony of a Hungarian Jewish doctor who was forced to actually assist Mengele inside Auschwitz. In his 1946 memoir, Auschwitz, A Doctor's Eyewitness Account, he described an operation where Mengele stitched two children together along their backs from shoulder to lower
What the
spine
hell?
in an attempt to create artificial conjoined twins and study how their bodies would
What?
respond. Now, there are no surviving medical records of the procedure because Mengele destroyed all of his notes before fleeing the camp. Because immediately I wanted to fact check this just to see if it was real. So, just so you guys know, there are no surviving medical records, but the Jewish doctors detailed anatomical descriptions along with survivor testimonies that actually mention hearing about the sewn together twins suggests that the account is credible. So, a lot of historians do generally accept this as consistent with Mengele's documented obsession with twin biology and surgical experimentation. Again, I want to make it clear that there's really no legitimate scientific reason to carry out a procedure like this, even by the standards of the 1940s. Any trained doctor would have known that it was biologically impossible to fuse two separate children into a single living organism. You would have to literally be a catastrophically bad scientist or not a scientist at all to believe anything otherwise, which again is why I think he was just, as you said, just feeding his own sick, twisted fantasies. But historians have tried to understand if this procedure did go ahead, what Mengele might have thought he was doing or what he was trying to achieve by actually doing this experiment. And the most common theory is that he wanted to mimic the natural formation of conjoined twins, forcing a shared blood supply to see how the bodies reacted. And this may have been part of his larger obsession with understanding or even manipulating the process of twinning to increase the birth of what Nazis saw as racially desirable children. But obviously, biologically, the outcome was inevitable because sewing two living bodies together without anesthetic or sterile conditions would have torn through skin and muscle, it would have restricted blood flow and exposed deep tissue to infection. So, within hours, bacteria would have caused gangrene and sepsis, leading to high fever, obviously excruciating pain, and then eventually death. Now, the Jewish doctor wrote that children died within 3 days and their wounds were swollen with pus and infection. Now, this particular case or this particular experiment wasn't discussed in detail at the Nuremberg doctor's trial due to the lack of physical evidence, but it has since become one of the most cited examples of the extreme brutality and complete abandonment of medical ethics inside Auschwitz.
God, this is insane. Like, it's honestly so hard to believe that anyone could justify that as science. Like we've said, it's kind of giving the idea that it's like feeding into his like twisted fantasy. It's also like so hard to think about how many people would have been involved. Like that is just crazy. I guess the question is, what like happened afterwards? Like after all this happened?
Yeah. Yeah. So after the war, genetics finally become what it was always meant to be, which is a science about understanding life, not controlling it. Because, as we said earlier, in 1953, Rosalind Franklin discovered the structure of DNA, the double helix, and that really changed how we understand heredity. Because instead of skull shapes and measurements, we finally saw the molecule that carries all of this genetic information. And as we mentioned earlier, decades later, the Human Genome Project mapped all 3 billion base pairs of human DNA and revealed that the tiny variations between us do not divide us into races. They simply explain the diversity that we see in health, traits, and appearance. And real twin research today is the complete opposite of what Mengele did. So studies like the Minnesota Twin Study will follow twins over decades to understand how genes and environments interact ethically with consent and to improve health. And now scientists go even further with something Mengele could never have imagined, which is obviously epigenetics. And we spoke about this at the start. And this is about how identical twins who start life with the same DNA actually become biologically different over time because of environment, stress, and lifestyle. So modern genetics is really about understanding variation, not ranking it. And it's about finding what makes each one of us unique and not deciding who is better. And that's really the kind of science that heals instead of harms. We're talking a little bit more about epigenetics because obviously I'm an epigeneticist, so I wanted to touch a little bit more on this topic. So epigenetics is essentially the idea, or it's not an idea, it's literally a proven thing. But essentially talking about it in the context of identical twins. So yes, identical twins have the exact same DNA, but DNA is not the only thing that matters when it comes to your characteristics. So epigenetics is basically where you have chemical groups which are added onto different points of your DNA, which influence how your cells transcriptional machinery read that DNA. So you can think about it like you have tags which are added onto your DNA, which will basically be like, hey, I'm a gene, read me, or I don't want to be read, just skip over me. So essentially, like, a chemical group will attach and it blocks the things that bind to your DNA, which help your cell read that DNA, if that makes any sense. So you'll often hear people say about how epigenetics is responsible for like turning genes on or off. And there's so many things that you do in your life that can influence your epigenetics or influence where these tags are added onto your DNA. For example, if you are a smoker, like people who have smoked for a long time, they all have a particular tag at a particular part of their DNA. And even when they stop smoking, it takes a really long time for that tag to go away. So if you have two twins, yes, they have the exact same DNA, but one of them smokes and the other one doesn't. One of them is going to have this tag added at a particular site in their DNA, and the other one doesn't. And that does affect how your cells read DNA. And so many other things can affect it, like even how stressed you are, what your diet is like. I mean, there are studies coming out literally every single day saying about how different things affect epigenetics. So yeah, it's like he was obviously trying to tackle this whole nature versus nurture debate, but now with the not only the advancements in genetics but also epigenetics, we are basically now know there's so much more nuance and it's so much more complex than I think scientists at that time could ever had imagined. Not that I'm calling him a scientist, because actually I'm not, because I don't think he was.
Yeah, honestly, that it's literally insane. It's so I always think with these things when we like delve into history, it's so insane to see how far we've progressed. Like, obviously, we're not saying Mengele is a scientist of any sort, but it is crazy to think like now, like nature versus nurture is not even in the conversation anymore. It's like your environment specifically affects your epigenetics, and like your lifestyle factors affect your epigenetics, which ultimately affect like what part of your DNA is expressed. So yeah, I just think it's so crazy how far we've come. But obviously there is these like dark sides and twisted sides of science in history, and obviously it's very important to kind of platform those and like because obviously the survivors and the people who succumbed to the experiments, obviously they should have their story heard as well. But yeah, I just think like obviously it's a very dark side of science, human experimentation, as we found out on last week's episode as well. But thank you so much for that, Liv. Obviously the twin experiments were just kind of like one nuance of like everything that Mengele did and like other Nazi experimentation. So obviously, if you want to learn a bit more about um, that and learn and like do a bit more of a deep dive on it, then we'll leave the links in the description below. But obviously, we would like to end the episode on a bit of a lighter note. So now we will go on to our laboratory. Okay, Liv, do you ever read a research paper and have absolutely no idea if you're interpreting it correctly or even if the methodology is appropriate?
Oh my god, yes. And I don't know about you, but sometimes I read a paragraph in a research paper and I literally think to myself, like, am I stupid, or is this just written like in another language?
Exactly. Well, we need Jenny. It has this insane feature called the explain section feature, which helps you interpret papers. So you can highlight any part of the research paper, whether it's a graph, a dense paragraph, or a statistical analysis. Jenny will break it down in plain English.
Yeah, exactly. Like, I highlighted a regression analysis last week that literally had me questioning my whole existence as a bioinformatician. But Jenny explained what the variables meant, what the graph was showing, and even what the results were.
And it's not just simplifying. Jenny can give context, definitions, underlying assumptions, or even alternative explanations if you're really trying to understand the methodology.
You can even ask follow-up questions like, why did the authors choose this method? What does this p-value mean? It is literally like having a supervisor sitting next to you, just calmly explaining things that you pretend to understand.
It works on PDFs you upload and articles you've pasted in. If it's on your screen, then Jenny can explain it.
Yeah, if you struggle with complex academic language, and honestly, to be honest, who doesn't? This is the study hack that you have been waiting for.
Try Jenny and use SCP20 for 20% off. And as always, the link is in our episode description. Alright guys, so if you didn't know, for this season we are doing a little laboratory section every couple of episodes where you guys can ask us anything. So Liv, you've got a few questions from our listeners, so let's just jump straight in.
Yeah, so we did get many, so I'm sorry if we haven't got around to answering yours, because we actually got quite a lot, but I'm gonna read what I think are like the crazy ones. I'm gonna read what I think is gonna like expose you, Chaz, or give us some interesting insight into you and your life, and me, obviously. Okay, so I'm gonna start with this one that says, have you ever had a crush on a lab mate, even if it is just a convenience crush because you see them every day? Can I just say, we have all had a crush on someone that we've like worked with or done, like, do you know what I mean? Like a convenience crush. I love that she's called it a convenience crush, because I think we've all had a convenience crush at some point in our life. But you don't look convinced. You're like, no, no, babe.
I'm trying to think, honestly. I mean, like all throughout my like PhD and now my science career, I've been with Kieran, so that's just not been a thing. But I'm trying to think if I've had like previous jobs where I've like fancied someone and it's been a convenient crush.
I've never had a crush on like someone in my lab. I can't lie.
Low-key,
yeah, I shall not say much more about it, but yeah, let me just say, I don't think the guys who have been in my lab have been my type. But I've said this on the podcast before, I've definitely dated someone that I worked with, and let me tell you right now, that was a convenience crush, 100 million %, because what the hell was I thinking?
Why?
Well, it's a bit of a deep story, actually.
Oh, really?
Yeah. Have I not told you? I must have told you about it. Do you know what? I think it's actually like in my more adult life that I feel more comfortable talking about the story. But I actually think I was groomed. No, it's not funny. This is a trauma response.
I'm only laughing because you're laughing. I'm so sorry.
I do feel like this story is like a story for another day, to be honest, because it's quite long, but it was someone I worked with, and I'm pretty sure I was like basically groomed, and no adults around me really said anything. And so, yeah, I actually ended up like dating him for like a year, and it was like a whole weird situation. But anyway, this laboratory is supposed to be like on a lighter note, so yeah, I'm actually fine. We laugh about it now, like it is quite funny.
I'm sorry about that, Liv. I'm sure people. I was trying to be serious then. I was about trying to be like, I'm actually so sorry that you went through that.
No, obviously, like, we're not laughing at, we're just laughing at my situation. It's just me. Like, my response to anything traumatic is to just laugh. Like, if you tell me, you can tell me the worst news, I will laugh. Like, it's not because obviously I find it funny, but it's just my response. So I don't mind you laughing. Yeah. I'll tell you the story fully one day on the pod. But anyway, Taz, tell us, have you ever had a convenience crush or a lab mate crush?
I'm trying to think of all the jobs that I've done.
Oh, you used to work at like Hollister, babe. Come on.
Obviously, there was a lot of crushes there. Yeah, because none in the everyone lab was like a literal model. But I'm like, does that even count? Because like the crush never went anywhere. It was just like I was surrounded by like really hot guys. That was it. Valid.
But you've never had a crush in the lab?
No.
And for what reason do you think that is, Taz? What's wrong with the men in your labs?
No comment.
Right, we will swiftly move on from this question, but I'm curious, have any of the listeners have had any crushes on their anyone from their lab? I actually remember someone writing in about how they had a crush on their TA. Do you remember that laboratory?
Yeah,
And that
yeah,
was a really interesting laboratory. So if any of you guys have had crushes on your lab mates, write in laboratories because we want to hear these stories because yeah, we don't have a story ourselves, unfortunately. I kind of wish I did though. I wish there was fit men in my lab. Do you know what I mean? That'd make it more fun.
yeah, like
Or would it?
Pietro.
Wouldn't it? Pietro, for fuck's sake. Okay, moving on
Uh,
to the next question. Have you ever messed up an experiment and blamed it on someone else?
no. The
No?
answer to that is no. Like, I'm not that much of a bitch. I've never like messed up an experiment. There's definitely been times where I've like left a mess in the lab, and I've been like, "Oh, it was so and so. It wasn't me," or like, "It wasn't
Oh
me."
my God.
Like
And
that
who do you
that
blame it
mess wasn't
on?
me. I don't think I've ever blamed it on anyone. I've just like denied that it was
Just
me.
denied, like, okay. I feel like that's like a white lie. That's not even that big of a deal. I've messed up many experiments in my life, hence why I decided to pursue bioinformatics because I am a fucking liability in the lab. Like I would break everything. I remember once I literally like covered my he wasn't my PI, but I covered the lecturer in water because you know those like hose thingies that you put on the taps.
Yeah.
I was so thick in the lab that I couldn't even put that on properly, and like, I put it on like half, and I turned the tap on, and it literally went all over my lecturer, and
Uh,
he was so done with me in that whole session because I can't remember what we were like burning, but there was no, I don't know, we were burning something, and then there was another ingredient. See, why the fuck am I calling it an ingredient? There was another chemical that you weren't supposed to burn, and I literally went to burn it and he like screamed at me. And
oh
then
my
honestly,
god.
my friend was like, Liv, just sit down, like I'll do this. I got this covered. So I just sat there and I recorded the results.
Oh my god, you know what
So
happened to me once? It's kind of similar to you actually, but I still went in to do wet lab work. But I remember being at school and I don't know if you remember doing like triple science at school and you had to do like
mm,
specific labs and they would be marked and
yep.
stuff. But obviously I was doing one during I think chemistry and I had to heat up a beaker of water using a Bunsen burner. And so we were all doing that, right? And there was this girl who was in front of me and she did it with her beaker and obviously it started boiling and then the beaker just like smashed and like went all over
Oh
her Bunsen
my, yeah,
burner.
that would happen
And
to me.
you know when you're like, oh my god, like that is so embarrassing for her. Like, and she was like really panicking, like, because it was like dead silent. We were all being examined, and like
Oh
everyone
no,
was like,
yeah,
"Oh my
that's
god, what
awkward.
even like happens?" And then I shit you not, literally a minute after, I'm like, "That is so embarrassing." But it happened to me. The exact same thing happened. Like the beaker just obviously got too hot and just smashed. Like they obviously didn't provide us with the correct
Oh
beakers
my
that are
god.
like that you could boil stuff in.
Yeah, yeah.
So everyone was like, "What the hell?" And like it was just kind of going off in like a ricochet. And I think like four people's beakers
Oh my god, just
smashed like in
everyone's
this
just smashing.
experiment.
What
Oh
the
my god!
hell?
Talking of um labs at school, one of my teachers got electrocuted during a
Oh,
lab.
sorry. I'm evil for laughing at that, but that is funny.
Oh my god,
How?
it was literally so bad. He was demonstrating, he was like a physics teacher and he was demonstrating how like step up and step down transformers work on the like electric grid or something. And so he had like a mini model of it and he like turned it on and then I think he must have touched the wire and I shit you not,
No.
he's touching the wire and he like fully was like electrocuted and he had to use his leg because he couldn't move his arm. So he had to use his leg and push himself off of like using the desk of his desk. He had to push himself. He kicked himself away from this thing and he just fell on the floor and he like cracked his head open and slipped a
Oh,
disc and we were all
oh,
like
no
screaming
way.
and like some of us put him
Absolute
in the
chaos.
And this is like, we were in like, what year are we in? Year 12? So we were
Oh
all
my
like
God.
17, like, like, and yeah, so
What
that
the
was
hell?
a
Oh,
wild
now I
time
feel
at
bad for
school.
laughing. Now I know he cracked his head and slipped a disc. That sucks.
He came into school like 2 days later, and like the head of science was like, "Why the fuck are you here? Like, you go home and rest." And he was just like, "Oh, I
Oh
only
my
slipped a
God.
disc. It's fine." But yeah, he literally got fully like electrocuted.
I used to love science in school. Like, it was a time. Like, who
Same.
the fuck actually concentrated? Like, if you are a British listener, you did not concentrate in school in science. Like, there was a
No,
very, very few people who
just
concentrated, but
crammed at
the
the end, I feel like.
it crammed in it the last few, like the last month or so, but the majority of the year was. I'm sorry, I know this is really horrible, and now I'm an adult. I'm like, this is really stupid. But as a kid, it was all about who could make the teacher cry, and what you
My
could
God,
set on
yeah.
fire with the Bunsen burner, what chaos you could cause. Like, it was just all. Yeah, it would just, you'd leave the science class feeling like you've had an ab workout because you'd be laughing so much. I don't know what it is about science classes, like British science classes, but they were
I
just
don't know what it
fucking
is either.
funny. They were the best. They
I
were the
think the
best.
science
Anyway,
teachers were just so easy to like walk all over.
I agree. I agree. But like a lot of people who do their PhDs go on to become a science teacher. And I'm like, are we just really easy to like walk all over? I couldn't be a
Yeah, we
teacher
are.
because my patients could never, ever. Anyway, in answer to your question, none of us have explicitly messed up an experiment, but I feel like they're giving us good ideas for laboratories. Like, guys, again, if you're listening, if you've ever messed up an experiment and blamed it on someone
Yeah,
else, it is time to repent your sins by writing in a laboratory to the So Cultured podcast. Let us know.
I
We want to know all
agree.
the details. All right, finishing off with the last question. If there was one thing you could change in your lab, what would it be? Mine would be me working in
Mm.
it.
Oh my God, yeah, that would be so good. I need you to come teach me bioinformatics, to be honest. Like,
Oh,
I can do the
babe,
wet lab stuff, but
I meant like me working in it as in like I don't want to be working in it. Like if I could change one thing, that is I wouldn't be
oh, I
there.
thought you meant if you
I'd
could
be-
change one thing about my lab, you would be working with me.
No, I just meant I don't want to be working in mine. Do you know what I mean? Not that, like, I just would love to be. I'm sorry, I don't care. I'd like to be a Range Rover mum, and I'd just like to film So Cultured. That's what I want to do. I want to film So Cultured all day, every day.
I mean, I actually love doing science research, but it's just ruined by academia because it's so like grueling
Yeah,
and so like, I don't know, just having to
it's really
apply for
it's.
grants, getting money
Mm,
in, like publishing your stuff, like just I think I saw it on someone's story the other day. They were like, someone give me a job where I can just do science and have no other responsibilities like writing papers and like applying for grants. And I'm like, literally, give me that, please. I mean, maybe
mhm.
we're literally describing industry there, but
I
it
was
still
literally
comes
about to
with
say, like, I think that's industry,
responsibility.
babe.
No, but it's still responsibility. It's still like creating a product to sell, that kind of vibe. Whereas I'm like,
Mm.
maybe I just want to do another PhD. Like maybe that's the vibe. But
Absolutely not. No.
no, but don't you think if you did a PhD now, you'd absolutely slay it? I reckon
Oh my god,
if I
I'd
did
smash
another,
it. Are you joking me? 10,
literally,
10
I think it would
papers
be
in
so
first
easy
year.
now. Yeah.
No, I agree. I
Smash
think
it
once you've
now.
done it once, you know what you're doing, because I genuinely think most of the PhD is everybody goes through the same struggles. Everybody goes through the thing of, okay, how do you write a literature review? How do I start writing this code? How do I start this experiment? And then it's like, oh my god, someone scooped me. What do I do now? It's just like everybody has, like, it's a universal experience to go through. They're canon events, the PhD canon
Yeah.
events.
Yeah. What would I change about my lab? I honestly, just more money, to be honest. I would just
More
love more
money.
money in the lab to make it look really new and nice. Because the lab, I feel like every lab that I've worked in is just so old and like
Broke.
everyone from like, yeah, broke. And like from like this is so fucking shallow, but like from like an Instagram perspective, like I want a nice fresh lab for like the aesthetics, because the lab that I'm currently in is like not aesthetic at all. So that's what I
That's so
want to change.
relatable. That is so relatable. She
No,
wants
it's not
pink
at all. It's
pink
relatable to
gloves.
us, but no one else.
She wants
Oh my
pink
god,
gloves,
yeah.
the pink lab coat, the
Pink wrap.
clean aesthetic lab for the background. You
Yeah.
know, she needs these
That's what I
Instagram
want.
reels to go viral so she can, you know, become a full-time so cultured girly.
And just not work in the lab anymore. Like, yeah.
Just hire out a lab for the Instagram reels. Imagine.
Oh my
Imagine.
god.
Oh,
That's
well,
what
fun fact, when
that's
we was
what
doing the
idea.
when we was doing, like, when you came back to the UK and we were taking the new picture for our new logo, I was trying to find labs to hire because I thought it'd be so cute if we could do our picture in a
Oh.
lab, but there's literally none, so I don't think you can do that, I'm afraid.
Well, it's a business idea, isn't it?
There you go.
Lab
Rent out your
space
lab.
as a studio.
Rent out your lab space, guys. Anyway, that rounds up our second Ask Us Anything of season 7. I believe we have one more of these, so we will be popping something on our Instagram soon. So make sure you're following us there at So Cultured Podcast if you guys want to get involved. But for now, that wraps up this episode. So we will see you guys same time next week. Bye, everyone.
Bye.